Hi everyone, welcome to the channel, and I'm here for a list video for you guys. Now this is actually a video idea that I thought of just for a bit now, so I figured why not do it. So for this video I'll be going over the years of the 2000s decade, and I'll be letting you guys know what is my favorite album of each year of the 2000s. Now there's no guarantee that I'll do this for other decades. I just wanted to do one for the 2000s. And to be honest, if I did do one for other decades, like 80s, 90s, that would be very difficult, and that could, of course, subject to change. So I'm just going to do one for the 2000s, and I'm going to be letting you know my choice for my favorite album of each year. Now, some of these are rather tough, and I also try to just go with one album per artist. Basically, I'm not going to be choosing more than one album from the same band. So let's go ahead and get started with the year 2000. Now 2000 I thought was a very solid year for music, but my choice for the year 2000 would have to be this album, White Pony by Deftones. And for obvious reasons, this is one of my favorite Deftones albums, probably my second favorite. It's a very close second, actually, but yeah, definitely one of their best, definitely a really great album. This is the album where Deftones kind of experimented a little bit. This is where they really started doing that more. It's not as nu metal as the previous albums that came before this, but I mean, this is still a great album though. I mean, some of my favorite tracks on here would have to be Digital Bath, Street Carp, Knife Party, Passenger, and Change in the House of Flies. There's a lot of solid material on here, so Deftones, White Pony, that's my choice for the year 2000. Now for 2001, now I think there's a lot of people that can agree that this is one of the best, if not the best year, the best album of that year. My bad. But the album that I chose for the year 2001 is Lateralis by Tool. And believe it or not, this was actually the first Tool CD that I've ever purchased. And yeah, definitely not a bad start when collecting Tool albums. This album is very complex, it's very proggy, and there's a lot of really great stuff on this album. Of course, you got The Grudge, Schism, Parabola, and the title track. Definitely a lot of great songs on this album. Definitely one of Tool's best. I mean, if you call yourself a Tool fan, how is this not in the top 3 best Tool albums? So, Lateralis by Tool, that's my choice for the year 2001. Now for 2002, 2002 has just been a really great year for music as well. This is a time where a lot of bands are also just starting out. You know, you of course had metalcore becoming more popular. This is when some metalcore bands were of course coming around. This is also when post-grunge and hard rock bands were getting their start, at least a lot of them anyway. But I know some people might disagree with my choice for the year 2002, because I know that this album is kind of overlooked, I think. So the album I chose for the year 2002 is Rush, Vapor Trails. I know a lot of people cite this to be Rush's worst album, which I definitely don't agree with, at least nowadays. Now I will admit there was a time where this was actually my least favorite Rush album, but nowadays it's grown on me tremendously. There's a lot of songs on this album that I do return to often, actually. I think this is a very solid album. It's not one of their best. That's still something that goes without saying. It's still not one of their best, but I do think it's a solid album, and of course when it comes to Rush, they've never released a bad album, so you can't go wrong with any of their material. But some songs I really like on here would have to be One Little Victory, Peaceable Kingdom, How It Is. I mean, How It Is maybe one of the most underrated Rush songs. It's not super complex or anything, it's more of a simple type track, but it's just so memorable and catchy, and I don't know, there's just something so captivating about that song. I think the title track's pretty cool. You also got Earthshine, which is maybe the best song on the album, at least in my opinion. If it's not my favorite on the album, then it's definitely top 3 best songs on the album. But Vapor Trails by Rush, definitely a great album, so that's my choice for 2002. Really good album, and kind of underrated too. Now for 2003. There's a lot of albums that could have made my pick for 2003 because 2003 was yet again another great year for music. But I had to go with this album just because I think that this album is basically an essential if you listen to 2000s rock and metal. Like, if I had to make a list of essential rock and metal albums of the 2000s, this album would probably make that list. But my choice for 2003 would have to be Linkin Park, Meteora. And this is my favorite Linkin Park album, and I know it's a favorite for a lot of people. I mean, this album just has everything the band does right. And this, of course, has some of their best songs. It has some of Chester's best vocal delivery. Some of my favorites on here would have to be Don't Stay, Somewhere I Belong, Hit the Floor, Breaking the Habit, From the Inside, and of course the fan favorite song, Numb. Definitely a lot of great songs on this album, and yeah, definitely check out this album if you haven't already. It's a must listen. It definitely is. So yeah, definitely one of Linkin Park's best, and in my opinion, I think it is their best. But I know some people might say Hybrid Theory is their best. I mean, when it comes to both Hybrid Theory and Meteora, there really is no wrong answer. They're both solid albums. But for me, I'd go with Meteora as the best. So Meteora by Linkin Park, that's my choice for 2003. Next, we're at 2004. Now, I think 2004 was one of the weaker years for music of the 2000s, and mainly because it seems like there hasn't really been that much. But it still was a decent year for music for what it is, I think. But I know some people might disagree with my choice for the year 2004, because I know that this album is also, kind of underrated. Now, it's not the most underrated album in the world or anything, but I think it's pretty good. But my choice for 2004 would have to be Megadeth, The System Has Failed. And yeah, definitely not one of Megadeth's best, and again, I know some people might not agree with my choice for that year, but again, I think this album is kind of underrated. I mean, there's some overlooked stuff on this album. Some of my favorites on here would have to be the first 3 tracks, Blackmail the Universe, Die Dead Enough, and Kick the Chair. Those are all really solid tracks. I think Back in the Day is a pretty cool song too, but yeah, there is some good stuff on this album, even though it's not one of Megadeth's best works. I mean, it definitely comes nowhere near their 80s and 90s material, but I think for what it is, it's a pretty good album. So I decided to go ahead and go with this album for my choice of 2004, Megadeth, The System Has Failed. Now for 2005, now to be honest, I kind of cheated on this one a little bit because my choice for 2005 is actually a tie between 2 albums. And don't worry, this is the only time where there's going to be 2 albums. So I had a hard time really choosing a favorite album for 2005, so I went with these 2. I went with Dream Theater, Octavarium, and Demon Hunter, The Triptych. Now, why did I go with a tie for both these albums? Well, with Dream Theater's album, Octavarium, this album has tremendously grown on me as well. There was once a time where I did think that this was one of Dream Theater's weakest. Now, I never thought it was bad or anything, but I always thought the album was just kind of overrated with the Dream Theater fan base. Like, there's some people that just overhype this album. They say, oh, it's one of their best. And for the longest time, I couldn't understand why. But now, I kind of do understand why. I think this is probably one of their best, which is why it's one of the tied albums for the year 2005. But this album has a lot of solid material. The Root of All Evil, which is probably one of the best album openers from Dream Theater. You also got These Walls, I Walk Beside You, Panic Attack, Sacrifice Sons, and the title track Octavarium, which is the epic from the album. Now, I think some people still do overhype the title track to this album, and who knows, maybe the title track is really the reason why this album is, as popular as it is. Now, what do I think of the title track? Again, I like it. I think it's a good song, but I don't think it's as great as a lot of fans say it is. But I do like it, though. I do think it's still good. But just not to the extent that a lot of people claim it to be. But a lot of solid songs on this album, so it's actually grown on me, and I actually really appreciate this album now. I think overrated is still a fair argument to say about it, but yeah, it's still not one of their best, or it's not their best, I should say, but it is one of their best. That's what I should say. But yeah, definitely a great album. So Octavarium by Dream Theater. And the other album that's tied for 2005, The Triptych by Demon Hunter. Now, the reason that I had this tied with Octavarium is, well, for one, this is my favorite Demon Hunter album, and it's also maybe my favorite metalcore album of all time. Definitely a really great sounding album, and I think this album has a lot of variety to it. You know, when it comes to Demon Hunter, you don't just listen to them for the heavy stuff. You listen to them for the melodic stuff too, and there's not really a weak moment on this album. Now, I know some people don't like the Prong cover that's on here, but I actually don't mind it. Now, with Prong, they're a band that I have thought about checking out sometime. I might, whenever I'm in the mood to check out another band that I'm not familiar with. So, yeah, but yeah, definitely a great album. So, some of my favorites on here would have to be Not I, Deteriorate, Fire to My Soul, 1000 Apologies, Ribcage, and The Tide Began to Rise. A lot of great songs on here. I mean, this album also has some of their best ballads, like Deteriorate and The Tide Began to Rise. Those are both really great songs. I know some people might complain, oh, you know, it's not, the production's not polished enough like their modern albums are, or, you know, Ryan doesn't really sound as great on this album as he does, you know, the more newer albums, which is a fair argument to make, but I just think that this album has the best songwriting and just, you know, everything that the band does right, I feel like is on here. So, The Triptych by Demon Hunter and Octavarium by Dream Theater, those are both albums that are tied for my favorites of 2005. So next, we're at 2006. That's coming up next. Now, when it came to 2005 and 2006, both of these years were just very solid for music. So it was kind of difficult choosing a favorite album of 2006, but I didn't want to, you know, keep going with ties for this list video, of course. So I went with this album here, End of Silence by Red. Now, Red is a band that does mean a lot to me. They were actually the only band that I ever went to see in concert. I've seen them twice, and yeah, definitely a great band, and definitely one of my favorites within that modern rock scene. But yeah, definitely a really great album, definitely one of their best. I mean, if you call yourself a Red fan, this album ought to be in the top 3 favorite Red albums. I mean, that's something that goes without saying. It's, of course, their debut album, and some favorites of mine on here would have to be Breathe Into Me, Let Go, Already Over, Pieces, and the underrated Break Me Down. A lot of really great songs on here, and yeah. And I think the song Already Over Part 2 is kind of underrated too. I actually don't mind that one. I know some people don't really like that one, and I know there's some people that think it's only okay. I like that one, though. It's a pretty nice ballad-like song, or it is a ballad, but yeah, definitely great stuff. So, End of Silence by Red, that's my choice for 2006. Now, for 2007, 2007 was not one of my favorite years for music. I think it's also one of the weaker years for music of the 2000s, but it still had enough, you know, to say that it was a decent year for music. So I decided to go with this album for 2007, and the album that I chose is An Ocean Between Us by As I Lay Dying. And this is my favorite As I Lay Dying album. This has some of their best songs, some of their best songwriting, of course. I mean, this album also has a lot of variety to it, you know, and the reason I say that is because, well, metalcore is not really, well, let's just say, you know, a very diverse subgenre of metal. So that's why, you know, whenever bands in metalcore, you know, have a lot of variety to them, that's why, you know, I, you know, kind of recognize that more, I guess, you know. So this album, and the fact that it has some of the most variety of all their albums, I think is one of the really big pluses to why this album is their best in my opinion. But some of my favorites on here would have to be Nothing Left, the title track, Forsaken, I Never Wanted, The Sound of Truth, This Is Who We Are. A lot of great songs. If you call yourself a metalcore fan, haven't heard this album yet, please do yourself a favor and check out the album. So that's my choice for 2007, As I Lay Dying, and Ocean Between Us. Next, we're at 2008. 2008, kind of like 2007, not the best, but also not the worst year for music out there. But my choice for 2008, it's pretty much a no-brainer for me. I got to go with this album here, Shogun by Trivium. And this is my favorite Trivium album. Pretty much always has been. I know some people don't like this album because it's too thrashy. It's not metalcore enough like their past work, mainly the first two albums, and even some of the stuff that they do nowadays. But I mean, who cares? You know, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that thrash is a bad thing? I mean, it depends. It can be, but in most cases, I don't mind thrash. I would say that thrash is maybe one of my favorite genres of metal, even though I'm not really into a lot of bands yet. I mean, there is a lot of thrash bands I would like to look into for sure, but I mean, the thrash elements, I mean, come on. It's not something that makes this album bad or worse than the next. I think, again, this is their best album. And this album also doesn't just have thrash. You also got some metalcore, you got some prog. I mean, this album has almost everything you want from the band. And I even have a poster of the album cover. I remember, you know, going to the Exchange store one day, I saw the poster, and you know, I saw a couple Trivium posters, and I, of course, went with that one because it is my favorite. So, yeah, definitely a solid album, though. I know a lot of Trivium fans say that this is their best, and understandably so. Some of my favorites on here would have to be the opening track, which I still, for the longest time, cannot pronounce, but I also really like Down From the Sky, Insurrection, and The Calamity. Those two songs I think are pretty underrated. The title track's pretty cool too. I mean, there's not really a weak moment on this album, but yeah, definitely a great album. So Trivium's album Shogun, that's my choice for 2008. Next, we're at 2009, the last year of the 2000s, and the reason I went with this album is because this is an album that definitely means a lot to me. And this album pretty much goes without saying, it's definitely one of this band's best albums. And the album that I chose for 2009 is Dear Agony by Breaking Benjamin. And this was basically the album that started my journey with rock and metal. I mean, this was really the album that really, I guess, pushed me furthermore into hard rock. And yeah, definitely a solid album. It's probably my second favorite Breaking Benjamin album. I mean, it's a very close second for me. But yeah, I think there's a lot of fans that can agree that this is one of their best. I know there's some people that say that this is their best or their favorite. Can't argue with that. I mean, it's definitely a great album. I mean, some great songs on here would be Fade Away. I Will Not Bow is good, but honestly, I don't care if I ever hear that song ever again. Kind of overplayed, but not bad though. You also got Crawl, Give Me a Sign. You also got Lights Out, the title track, Into the Nothing, Without You. I mean, I can go on and on. I mean, this album, I have a lot of nostalgic feelings and memories with this album, and yeah, definitely a great hard rock album. So if you're into hard rock or alternative metal, check this album out if you haven't already. So that's my choice for the year 2009, Breaking Benjamin, Dear Agony. Well, there you have it, guys. That is my video for the list of my favorite albums of each year of the 2000s. Let me know what you guys think. What are your favorite albums from each year of the 2000s? Is that something that would be easy for you to do? I know it wasn't easy for me, so yeah, I'm pretty happy with the choices that I chose here for this video, so let me know your thoughts. So with that being said, thanks for watching, have a nice day, and take care.